Welcome to Black Hat Briefings, held November 21st through the 22nd, 2001 in Amsterdam. This is videotape number 13B, a continuation.
Welcome back. Okay, good. Now, what I want to do now is we're just going to talk a little bit about some real-life scenarios here, where people have chosen to develop their websites in such a way that might not that expose them to potential vulnerabilities. I'm not going to hack into a bank. I'm not going to do anything like that because I got a wife and kids. So, but what I am going to do, this is going to be probably the most expensive demo in all time because I'm dialing an international call to connect up inside of the Krasnopolski at about $10 a minute. But I'm using a stolen credit card number to pay for this, so it's kidding. Kidding, Mr. Cameraman. Okay, so what I'm going to do is connect up. Without you people seeing. Is it going to connect? Huh? Oh, yeah, well, let me connect up first. Like, I'm going to let you guys see my dial-up number, right? I'm sure, hey, go for it. I don't need to make it easy for you. We got Tim back there scribbling down my numbers. I'll show him. Watch this. I'll get home and it'll be a nice email waiting for me. Assuming they actually gave me a connection. That doesn't sound like a good sound. Be right back. No, he's not going to give me his. That's the problem. Nobody trusts anybody here. I mean, I'm sitting like a guy I've known for years, sitting there with him. He's got his laptop, and he's like, gets up to go to the bathroom and locks his keyboard, and walks around. I'm like, dude, come on. Like, I'm going to be stopped by you locking the keyboard. So they're going to fix that. I actually had everything set up, but it kind of fell through, apparently. I had a local dial-up and all that good stuff. We can all just kind of go into the business office as well and show you. So while they're doing that, I'm going to shift gears and kind of talk about this second guy first. There's really two ways to exploit conditions over the web. One is for us as remote clients to use SQL injection and directory traversal and buffer overflows to compromise the web servers. The other, which really I don't think a lot of people pay too much attention to because it's not necessarily real sexy, is taking a little bit more time and using server-side components to compromise some of your clients. People who come to your site, right? So there is, even in Windows 2000, which by default will be using Kerberos to authenticate clients internally, there's still the use of the LM hash structure, NTLM credentials inside Windows 2000. For one, accessing a legacy server will resort to an NTLM credential being automatically passed. Telnet server allows you to make a connection to a remote telnet server and pass your NTLM credentials over port 23. That would all be internal. So if you have the client, the server set up to do that, and the client connects, they could authenticate to a secure server by using their currently logged on credentials. Who's familiar with the telnet exploit in regard to Windows 2000 for that? That Dildog wrote Talk NTLM, which was a rogue telnet server that was sitting out there on the network. Internet Explorer would automatically parse a telnet request and pass that request onto the telnet client. So you could send embedded in a URL or part of the URL itself, telnet to the box ID. You got it set now?
I don't know.
We can't dial international. It goes beep, 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 beep.
I don't know what it is.
Great. So, what was I saying? Where am I?
URL.
Oh, all right. Whew. I was in the Bahamas for a minute there. It's kind of nice. You could initiate a automatic connection to telnet what, and with this code running on the back end, the box would automatically try to authenticate you using NTLM. It was kind of cool. So you'd get their username and password. I like stuff like that. I like to be able to silently get people's usernames and passwords because I think it's kind of fun. Not that we would ever do anything with it. But who all is a... You're not going to answer me. Who all runs the SQL Server 2000 enterprise tools, any of the client connectivity tools on their box, or MSDE? Yeah. Thanks for being honest. Okay. Well, when you install those, some interesting things happen. Back in Windows 2000, God, did I actually say back in Windows 2000? It's already... I'm gonna back up just for a second. You saw that we were talking about integrated authentication with SQL Server. Back with SQL Server 7, that was done via a name pipe session. So if you told SQL Server to use integrated authentication, a name pipe session over 139 was created between you and the server, and then that's how it would automatically authenticate you. You had to have 139 open to the SQL Server, which was fine. It's an internal box. Everybody, when you're blocking credentials at the firewall, SMB, what ports do you block? 139 and 445. What else do you block? Good man. So I'm not going to get him. Is that coming in or going out? Do you allow outbound sessions from a connected? Do you allow outbound established? Do you allow inbound established? Maybe. So what's neat is that in SQL 2000, they introduced this new library called dbnetlib. Do I go into all this? Yeah. You'd think I would know because, a little too much there. They introduced a new library called dbnetlib. And it was really cool because dbnetlib supports integrated authentication over IP without having to use name pipes. It does it over port 1433. So if you go to the client and you tell it to use dbnetlib, which is now the default for IP sockets in Windows 2000 on the client side, and the server, which is ssnetlib or whatever, you can automatically authenticate your people over 1433. So I got to thinking about, well, that's really pretty cool, because now my NTLM credentials can go out 1433. And then I went, my credentials can go out 1433. You know, and we're not blocking that necessarily. In many cases, we have 1433 open explicitly. Server-to-server queries through the firewall, where you have one query that's going to be participating in some other query of a sister company, partner, whatever you have. And those are okay, because we always encrypt that traffic. But the point is that from an infrastructure standpoint, 1433 outbound is not by default closed on everybody's firewall. So really all we had to do was figure out how to get the client to make a dbnetlib reference. How do you get the client to do that? Well, it really wasn't a huge deal, because in Windows 2000, the only way you got dbnetlib was to go to a client and install MSDE on it, or install the enterprise tools. Like this guy's running Windows 2000 Pro. So all I can do is load SQL Server on him. Well, what's interesting is that, we're good? Pardon me? Oh, the super secret phone. I'm sorry.
What's causing the NTLM? Is it a Windows NT4 client?
1 second. Maybe we won't need pings dial-up stuff. Maybe I will. What's causing NTLM is the NTLM SSP provider for Windows NT. Okay? It's still there.
If we have a SQL 2000 server?
If you have a SQL 2000 server, well, here's what happens. What we want to do is, if you had loaded on a client, SQL Server 2000 already has this. It supports incoming 1433 sessions, obviously, it's SQL Server, so it's going to take 1433 in. But on that same IP channel, it will now authenticate the user. So before, any client that you wanted to use NTLM had to use the name pipes client library. Client library. And so now we don't have to do that. It's a one-size-fits-all library. dbnetlib does encryption over, it supports encryption, multi-protocol encryption, automatic authentication, integrated authentication rather, all that good stuff. That's what dbnetlib does. So when you installed the client-side tools on a workstation, not only did it install dbnetlib, but it installs some ActiveX controls that we use to enumerate some of the SQL Server objects. But even outside of that, before we even go there, if I know that dbnetlib is on somebody's box, which really wouldn't be that hard to do, if I go to Microsoft SQL Server developer news groups, one can pretty much bet that all of those developers have the client-side tools on their box, and you have their email address. So you email these guys, and your SQL Server developers are typically who? To the system. They're administrators, typically. So what we can do, this is a lame way of getting them to connect. If I do client-side HTML and I instantiate a new ActiveX object on client-side HTML, and they have scripting running, and they've prompted for domain for data sources across a domain. There's a lot of ifs there. What I can simply do is, remember our connection string? Same thing. This is happening on the client. So I have a web page on my server. We're good?
Yeah.
Great, thank you, sir.
Zero first.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your trouble.
Okay.
I would have this object tag in an HTML document on my website. Well, not my website. The evil guy would have this on his website. So he would have you go to the website, you're looking at something, or send you an HTML mail. Now, this object we get instantiated, and here's what we're doing. Connection string, blah, blah, blah. SQL Server, persistent security false, initial catalog is pubs, which we, I'll have on my server. Here's the IP address of the server. Network library equals dbnetlib. Well, what's neat is in the ADO-DB connection string, I get to specify what library the client uses. So if you have this on your server, on your client, what happens is it will pop up and say, do you want to access, you're about to access a data source in another domain. Do you want to do that? A lot of people say yes to that, I can tell you. Because that's what they want to do. Particularly if on the side I say, click here to get this data or something. And if you engineer it right, you say, access my data source with this so-and-so. So you've already used the term data source. And so they go, okay, I want to access the data source. And they click the button. And then they get a security warning that all it says is you're about to access a record source from a different domain. And they go, oh, okay, yeah. So they click it. This object gets instantiated. And right there over port 1433, out go their username and their NTLM hash. And I get to collect it. He got me set, so I don't need yours. But I might just keep it anyway. I might just hand it out to everybody. Hey, thank you. So, in the initial initial demos of doing this, I just wanted to do a capture on the network just to show you what was happening. And you would see 1433 get pass those credentials. So what I wanted to do here is kind of beef it up a little bit. Having to do all of that is lame, right? Going through all they have to have ActiveX. They have to have said to prompt for accessing a domain source across the network. And by default, it's off. But what's cool is there's this ActiveX object called SQL namespace, which whenever you install on the client, when you install the client tools, this ActiveX object is marked safe for scripting. Yes, smiles. So not only is it marked safe for scripting, it also, as does the ADO-DB connection object, it also allows me to specify the network library. So all we do is say ns equals new ActiveX data, or ActiveX object, SQL namespace, initialize. I just call it grabber. Set the IP address, trusted connection, yes, network library, dbnetlib.dll. And guess what? Absolutely silent. You go to the web page, you're reading everything, you don't even know that this object got instantiated. The next thing you know, I've already got I've got in clear text your NT username and password and the NTLM hash. Now, there's not a whole lot I can necessarily do with that. I can sit there and crack on it, And depending on how strong the password is, you know, it might take me 3 months to do it. But so what? I mean, we've got racks and racks of servers. Well, now, okay, I don't have racks and racks. I mean, but I've got a bunch of servers. So those guys can just be sitting there, and once I get it, I've got it. The other thing we can do is like SMB relay type things and pass the hash. So to kind of illustrate this, I went to Linux to write a little app. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Ta-da! Ta-da! Don't make me restart it again. Well, it's on, it's just not getting the signal.
Should we be limiting our installations of the SQL enterprise tools on our workstations and our networks?
You should be blocking 1433 outbound connections. You should be applying Service Pack 2 to your workstations. Because I brought this up to Microsoft. I do that first. Typically, I do that first. If I find an issue, I go and I tell them about it, and I let them do kind of what they want to do with it. So in Service Pack 2 of SQL Server, they made these objects not safe for scripting by default. My issue with that is that people don't go around to the client boxes and install the Service Pack for SQL Server. You go to the SQL Server and install the Service Pack. So that is something that you need to do. So what I wanted to show you is that this is not... I'm going to have to reboot. Oh, wait. The only time I've ever had any weird issues with the VIO is whenever I use the port replicator on one of these units. Because once I turn it off, whoa. So just give me a second to reboot that. So, and this really isn't a huge deal. I mean, the vulnerability landscape on this guy is somewhat limited. But there's a bigger message here, and that's that sometimes we never really know what processes are sending out our credentials. I mean, it wasn't explicit. You know, they didn't come out and say, okay, well now with DBNet lib, 1433 will be used for NTLM credentials. And to me, I'd like to know that. So the real lesson is even in Windows 2000, I mean, in Windows NT, we're all kind of hip to NTLM and the LM hash and how weak it is, right? I mean, we use low-fat crack and we sniff the connections and all that. But in 2000, we kind of think, okay, we're all Kerberos, everything's cool. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to harden your Windows NT server and client installations. Is it working? Yay. And there was much rejoicing. Well, now that was a Monty Python reference. Hey, Cameron, I got it. Yeah. Rough crowd. So inside of Windows NT, the group policy, there's a setting that allows you to set NTLM version 2, which is strong encryption, 128-bit NTLM, and you can sign server and client communications. That's the kind of stuff that you need to do.
we have to set something on the clients too? Or that is setting it on the clients?
Group policy will set it on the clients. You have a minimum client level of connectivity with NTLM credentials.
For NT4 clients?
Yep.
If we install Active Directory
It depends.
upgrades NTLM?
You can actually, there is support for NTLM version 2 for Windows 95 clients. And it's on the Windows 2000 client CD. So you have to go through and do that. If you're in a 2000, if you have pre-2000 boxes out there, which I guess a lot of people still do, everyone close your eyes. Not a single one of you. If you still have those legacy clients, then you're going to have a little bit more work to do. And that's why border infrastructure is so important. You know, really, anytime a packet leaves the trusted network, it needs to be constrained. So only let it, like the gentleman in the back, you know, only allow out what has to be allowed out. Unfortunately, we still tend to see people with the, you know, the opt-in, or however you want to call it, the mentality of, I'm going to set up a firewall and I'm going to close down the bad stuff. When what you really need to do is set up a firewall, close down absolutely everything, and open up what you have to have. And if you do that, then a lot of these types of attacks are mitigated. But when you do this, I mean, when you can get a silent SMB connection like that, it's pretty cool. So let's just show you real quick. Yes, but here's the trick. Now, I was kind of pissed at this too. Windows XP in the default installation now ships with DBNetLib on it. Even the home edition of Windows XP has this DLL on it. Granted, I don't have a safe for scripting ActiveX control that allows me to instantiate that object and set up a back channel connection to where I can grab the credentials. But what else can we do? When the Windows distribution starts to include support for DBNetLib on it, already registered on the machine, you know, that tells me that their data-enabled model is getting very big. I mean, before, and it was fine for us before. You had to load the client-side tools. We're assuming we know what it does. Yes, we want to use IP to do NT-based authentication. That kind of tells us what we're doing here. But now you don't know anymore. You don't know where that's going to be used and what else it's possible of doing. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at it and then we'll do the demo. Are we out at 5:15, 5:30? How much time do we have? God, this is so unprofessional. How long do I talk? It is not. 4:45? Is when I'm through?
5 o'clock.
Well, okay. Well, wait a minute. Okay.
5 o'clock. The next scheduled break is 5 to 5:15. 5 to 5.
And then I'm out of here?
Yeah.
Well, okay, wait, okay. See, now I'm like deer in the headlights. What am I doing? Oh my God, oh my God. Okay, so I'm going to open up VMware. No. Phew. Sorry, that's Mandrake 8.0. This is Red Hat 7.1. As if I say that like I know what I'm talking about with Linux. Yeah, that's why Mandrake Linux over there. One of the reasons I chose to write this under Linux is because, and let me clarify that. I didn't write this tool. I took Dildog's NTLM, Talk NTLM code and changed it. Granted, it was a substantial change. The packet structure for a telnet authentication is supremely easy. I mean, insofar as not his code wasn't supremely easy, he did an excellent job. The client communication was simple. On this guy, it becomes very, very difficult. Difficult for me. So what we're going to do is I've got that guy compiled. This is called SQL. Get it? SQL. But it's telling me your credentials, so it's a squeal. I thought long and hard on that. Come on. Thank you. Thank you. I made it up myself. I'd like to thank Stolanaya and Robert Plant. All right. So this guy is listening on 1433. And hopefully this new VMware 3.0 is not going to do what it did earlier. I kind of need to breeze through this pretty quickly. So I've just got a client-side guy here. Blah, 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 blah. So here's the same code, basically, that I have up here. Except you see my internal address. Is it .50? Yep. So I open up an email. I'm sorry. I open up a web. Oh, come on. Get me out of there. Oh. Let me show you what we had on the browser side. That's too much for the laptop. Sending a net response. Okay. All the website does is just say, hey, please call me, or whatever. This would be the equivalent of an HTML mail. There were no warnings. Of course, you didn't see me do it. I can hit refresh again. No warnings, no anything. Automatically instantiated that object. So what's happening on the Red Hat box, hopefully, is that it's grabbing probably timed out. The squealer box is listening on 1433, waiting for a call, NTLM authentication call to come in, negotiates NTLM, sends me a challenge, I send it a response, and then it dumps the hash out for me, just the same way the talk NTLM did. Now on this one it said that the negotiation failed. I'm thinking it timed out between the two sessions. So you didn't actually get to see it, display it on the screen, and no round of applause for that. But rather than working on the timeouts on that guy right now, I'm going to jump over to my other exploit, and we'll come back to this, okay? If we have time. And I've got the code and all of that stuff. The thing to remember is that with all of this development going on, that we have to be very careful with whom we give the tools to, the user rights that those people have on those machines, and really more importantly, we have to continue to have a mindset of security and depth, where you do a check here and then you do a check there, like we did on the secure development side, right? where even though we know that there's little chance of them doing anything, we still do a couple of checks here. We tighten down SQL Server over here. We use Windows integrated authentication. Okay, so now I'm going to connect up. Sorry. I mean, I do want to trust everybody, but I'm not going to connect up with my thing with you saying, I'm sorry. Please don't get mad. And hopefully I won't have to reboot again. Hopefully I won't have to reboot. All right, so just bear with me one moment, please. So I'm going to connect up to the Batcave with a super secret dial-up number that takes me into a non-routed network. And that's the cool thing, is that now if they're tracing this, it looks like it's coming from Charleston, South Carolina. Ah! Ah! You guys. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, then it's on my chest. It's okay. Yeah, now we have it on video. Great. I'm changing it. God, it's like the American Express commercials where they actually have a picture of the real card. And you're like, yeah, I'd like to buy that. All right, so we're connected up at a measly 26.4. Who's familiar with Steve Gibson's site? Oh, what? It has some interesting capabilities, yes? No? Mr. Gibson has a site that allows us to us and more than 10 million other folks to scan our computers to find out what ports are open. There was a lot of discussion about Windows XP's propensity to be the new denial of service preference for script kiddies and hackers everywhere because of its support for raw sockets, as if nothing else had raw sockets before, which it always has had. Part of what he allows us to do is to protect ourselves from Microsoft and who he thinks is a very, very bad developer and evil incarnate. And he allows us to do that by going to this Shields Up site. It's a secure site, so nobody gets to really see what's going on here. You're about to pass. Yes, in the future, do not show it to me again. Okay. So for those of you who haven't, who has actually used this site? Who is a fan of Mr. Gibson? Yay. Who is not a fan of Mr. Gibson? I'm just curious. I'm not going to make a value judgment. So here's what happens. We go to this site. And from here, we can test our shields and probe our ports. I'm going to say, to start with, test my shields. So it tells us our IP address. This is actually the IP address of a box in Charleston. But it's proxy, right? So I'm dialed in. So what he's doing is he accepts a connection from us, takes the IP address out of the HTTP header, and then pumps that in to his DLL up here that performs the scanning for us. Tells us if 139 is open. This is a relatively simple test. And he's told me that I'm a good little boy because he couldn't do anything on 139. So now what we're going to do is go to probe my ports. And this does a little bit more of an intensive scan, identifying the most commonly abused open ports. Tells me about 21, 23, basically does a really nice scan of my box. Now, everything is closed and stealth on this box except 25, as far as his system can see. So that's good. I had like a passing grade. Now you'll see up here in the URL, there's really nothing that identifies what my IP address is. So how is he doing it? How does he identify what our IP address is?
The numbers represent your IP address.
I thought that too.
They do.
No.
Could you repeat the question?
I was asking how, you mean this R, whatever?
Yeah, if you change them around, you can make it be different IP addresses.
Right, but that's not where that comes from. But here's what we'll, I'm going to view the source of this document. Actually, I'm going to view the source of the previous document. To probe my ports. Now let me look for, what would be a dumb way of doing it? Hidden. Nope, hidden internet server. That's not it. Well, looky there. Input type is hidden. Value equals A2 YF LJBY, which happens to be an 8-character alphanumeric string, which oddly enough maps right over to the octets of our IP address. So in a client-side HTML document, he's chosen to identify my IP address in a hidden HTML tag. So let's go file save as C:\temp /grc htm. Oh, I could have just done it right there, huh? Open this up. Here we have back where our hidden field was. And I'm going to have my post action be http://grc.com/x. Yep. File save that. So what do you say we mess around with this value? Instead of JB, let's put, who knows, MO. Save. Now we still don't know what that value is. We're assuming it's the IP address that's somehow cryptographically represented. Well. It has indeed changed the first 2 octets of the IP address. So, FTP on whatever this box is, wherever in the world it is closed. HTTPS is closed, everything else is stealth. Well, good for them. However, I'm the one looking at the information. So, in an application that's designed to be used for security, designed by a security professional, we've introduced hidden HTML tags that represent the IP address that, with a very simple basic edit, allows us to change some of the characters around, post into his server, and not just scan someone else's machine, but scan someone else's machine and give me the results. Now, we're not going to be able to just sit here all day and futz around with this cryptographic hash of the IP address, right? And this really doesn't matter too much because, you know, after all, we don't know what the hash is. Well, I kind of do, but I'm not telling. But I'm going to tell you why it doesn't matter. What's, well, give me an IP address. Somebody. What? A public IP address that you'll know will, well, wait, here we go. Wait, ping www.microsoft.com.
You can ping Cisco.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They've got ICMP off of there.
Ping Cisco.com.
Cisco. Oh, you know what? I don't have my firewall client installed on this guy, so the dial-up's not going to go out of him. But DHCP should have, I mean, DNS should have still tried to resolve it. Huh?
17.254.0.91. It's Apple website.
17 dot who?
254.
254 0
91. Should be Apple.
921. That's Apple's?
91.
91. I was going to say, wow, that might be Apple's. Maybe that's the problem. Okay. So, we saw earlier a reference on his site to, we don't have much time. This little applet of his called IP Agent. Free IP Agent. Okay. I'll take it. IP Agent does some interesting things, like supporting multiple IP addresses, multiple IPs. Before I do this, stop. Get hold of yourself, man. Let's see. Seventeen dot what? Yes. Oh, that's a nice little sound. 17.254.0.91. There we go. So, courtesy of Mr. Gibson, we are now scanning Apple's computers and returning the result set to me. So any IP that we want, we now have a scanning proxy available to us, which will allow us to gather some really rich information. Now notice, and previously to me doing this, if you look in the URL, since I have multiple IP addresses, there you have the representation of the IP address directly in the URL. So what this allows us to do is we can either cryptographically attack the hash, whatever the little algorithm, which my guess, uneducated guess without really even looking at the algorithm, might be a shift bit register. But I wouldn't know, because that would not be legal. I guess, I don't know. I'm not worried about DMCA for stuff like that. But that would allow you to programmatically script this stuff. So with the T1, we could script, I don't know, 1 million simultaneous requests against somebody's IP address to send a series of nanoprobes to their box, one after another, continuously. In effect, we could use him to pose a distributed, it really wouldn't be distributed, but a denial of service attack on somebody else's box. So my humble statement would be we don't necessarily need to worry about raw sockets problems with Microsoft, as Gibson says, but more importantly, we might want to worry about Gibson himself. So this can be scripted, as I said, and all the results pushed out, and it can also be abused. Now, how can we have prevented this? I mean, I actually think this is somewhat of an important, it's kind of a big deal, because I can scan other people's boxes remotely, scriptably. How could we have prevented this from a design standpoint? Pardon? He may have been able to use a session variable. The one important thing is that he's already gotten the IP address of the unit. And he's taken the IP address of the unit earlier on in the session. And now he trusts me that the only variable he uses now is that one variable. It would be extremely simple to, in this code, check the current HTTP header, remote address, and say, okay, I'm aware that I got the IP address that I'm supposed to be scanning, which is your IP address, supposedly. But just to be on the safe side, before I perform the scan against the box and all your ports, let me look at the current session IP address, and do they match? And if not, don't do it. He doesn't do that. To me, the current session validation would stop pretty much this whole process. Now notice how he dumps it into a DLL, which means that there's a secondary process that's executing this, right? Even if he did that, it would probably still be possible for me to dump the request, or multiple hundreds of thousands of requests, to his system, and it very well may be able to scan somebody else's box, but at least it wouldn't give me the results. That's really the main issue here from an abuse standpoint. I don't know when somebody's going to alert him to this. There was something similar to this that happened with a hacked version of the IP agent, a year ago. And it was fixed in the IP agent, but with this multi-protocol support, pulling the IP address directly from the stack without even validating it and then presenting the push buttons for me to scan is another part of the problem. Remember, give me another IP address real quick. Oh yeah? 5 or 2? 3.5. All right, so what I was going to show you, but can't, we can't now, was that, you could stack your whole stack with IPs and go down one after another and just scan them all day long. So those are the kind of functionality first, security last issues that continue to be prevalent here on the internet. I think it's particularly ironic, right?
He writes on the same page where you pushed about how good of a programmer he is and how well he did with the language assembly. That's what it said on the other page.
Yes, it did. So, I wish we had more time. I was going to show you some other cool stuff, but I guess that's all. Let me. Are there any quick questions before we all go drink?
How long is this page now up?
Well, there's 10 million some odd scans being done. I'm probably responsible for 4 million of them myself. I'd say that's been over the course of, I don't know, several years now. So, I mean, and you can...
That IP agent thing's been up for months.
IP agent has, but it's a newer version that supposedly fixed these issues. So all these were made public, chose not to fix them, and and I guess the other message is that it doesn't just, insecure processes don't just put you at risk, they put other people at risk. Because tonight, people are going to be scanning the NSA, right? I mean, not right. But they're going to be, other people's boxes are going to be scanned, and there's going to be absolutely no retribution for those people. And it's something that they shouldn't do, but something that people do. But anyway, any questions? I know we're going to...
SQL getting a public release.
Pardon?
SQL. Does it get a public release?
Yes, I'm sorry, thank you very much. SQL and all of the things that we've done here will be on the Hammer of God website. When I get back, I'll post all this stuff up. www.hammerofgod. I don't trace, don't track. You don't have to register or anything. Just go to the conferences section, and you'll be able to download the PowerPoint presentation. I'll have all of these samples up there if you want to look at them. Just remember now that the samples are wrong. Okay? I mean, they're on. I can see it now. Hey, man, we got this from 10 seconds. Look at that. It's like, oh my God. So I'll have all of that stuff up there for everybody to take a look at. Thank you very much. Wait. Thank you. This also has some good SQL injection and security and stuff like that. All of this is on the Hammer of God website. If you have questions or comments, I'm Thor at Hammer of God. Send me an email and I will reply to you. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time and have an excellent rest of Black Hat.